and welcome to the Protagonists. I just love my background, by the way. Good on our graphics department. They've done a great job. Just watch out for my right and left ears. Bit of a side swipe. We can talk about some very serious things too. As with all wars, we've witnessed lies, damn lies, and statistics flung from all sides. Look, there's flying statistics. Some call it dung. There is much noise about the means and the ends. Is it Israel who commands and wants a forever war to expand its footprint? Or is it the supreme leader of the universe, Donald Trump, engineering a masterful plan to control the world's oil and gas to buttress the petrodollar and contain China? Get down, get down. The Gulf states have been badly damaged by a war. President Trump, boing, sprang on them. But surely they must have seen it coming. What will be their decision on US bases, on their territories, and what are their previous bright, shining cities and unending wealth? Just look at Dubai. Magnificent city. It's suffering enormously at the moment. The rest of the world still sits and waits until their oil, gas, fertiliser and food supplies run out. Which economies will collapse and which will survive and prosper? When does fury and condemnation begin if no deal can be struck? Strike that. Sign that deal now, otherwise I'll bomb you. Oh, well, I'll still bomb you anyway, but just sign it, please. We're running out of ammunition. Will Israel be just reined in for once and for all? I don't think so. Will America be great again? Or will we see who holds the trump card? Let's talk to our panel. Our panel is, as I said before, absolutely magnificent, to say the least. We have Dr. Kees van der Peel, and he's a Dutch political economist and author, peace and democracy activist. Also Dr. John Laughlin, Director of Forum for Democracy International, and Emeritus Professor Joseph Siracusa, former inaugural Dean Global Futures of Curtin University. Thank you very much for joining me. First of all, I just want to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, John, who do you think is who do you think's in charge that are pulling the strings and manipulating all these people? Or is it just a combination of stupidity?
Well, I think you've summed it up very well, actually, Mike, in your introduction. I think it is a combination of stupidity. There's no doubt, I don't think it's a matter of public record, that Israel encouraged Trump to launch this war at the end of February. But I always believe in these situations where there is a lot of mystery and a lot of murkiness and where the signs are confusing and contradictory, that Occam's razor is the best device. In other words, you have to seek the simplest explanation. And the simplest explanation is indeed, I think, stupidity. By stupidity, I mean that whoever had Trump's ear at the moment when he decided to launch this attack together with Israel, and of course Netanyahu was one of them, managed to convince him, against all his previous promises and statements, that he wouldn't launch another war in the Middle East, by appealing to his vanity. Around the world, in Europe, but around the world, people believe, perhaps rightly, that you can twist Trump, you can get Trump round your little finger by flattering him. And in the aftermath of the Venezuela operation, which by any objective standard was a spectacular success, however unjust it may have been, it's not difficult to imagine a scenario in which he was led up the garden path, yes, by Israel, by the Israeli lobby, who of course were doing it for their own goals, but that he has walked into a most colossal trap. You outlined in your introduction, Mike, a number of goals. Is it to save the petrodollar? Is it 4D chess? Is it this? Is it that? Yes, those were all the goals. I'm sure they are the goals. Trump is very aware of the danger to the petrodollar. He's mentioned it in statements before. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is all these goals, all these clever moves, clever moves, coming up against the brick wall of reality. And the brick wall of reality is that Iran has this Wunderwaffen, has this wonder weapon, which is an absolute textbook case of asymmetric warfare. And that Wunderwaffen is, of course, blocking the Strait of Hormuz. And with that choke stranglehold over the world economy, that is worth, let's say, all the weapons and defense systems and Patriot missiles and Oreshniks and so on. It's worth more than all of those things put together.
Dr. Kees Vanderpeel, could you just tell me your thoughts? Who do you think is the puppet master? Is there a puppet master? I said before, is it a combination of slipperiness and stupidity?
Well, I actually think that we haven't fully understood the meaning of and the consequences of the collapse of communism in Europe, because that led to a downgrading of the role of Europe in the Atlantic equation. So the post-war Euro-Atlantic bloc that led the West after the 1990s slipped into a different mode, and that was an Atlantic Zionism. So you can say we shouldn't judge Israel as the sole source of that social force, because just as we don't judge the Catholic Church by the size of Vatican City, we must see the real meaning of what is Atlantic Zionism, which is stronger in the United States than in Israel itself, almost, simply in a quantitative terms. And it's this class bloc which has led the United States to fight Israel's wars, the so-called war on terror. And there was only one big state left, and that was Iran, on the list originally drawn up after 9/11. And they've now attacked Iran, of course, on the pretext of its nuclear weapon and so on and so forth. So I think part of the growth, the class formation that led to this Atlantic Zionism was the Epstein operation, because Epstein was not just a blackmailer, but he was also a very important middleman in the formation of transatlantic Israeli companies that became active in the 1990s. There's a lot to be said there, but Epstein got a number of top politicians and businessmen on his list and on camera, which allowed people like Netanyahu, who was also, and especially Ehud Barak in Israel, to basically play with, among other people, Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the most frequently mentioned name in the Epstein list. And I think, therefore, he's vain, yes, but that vanity also worked in his conduct in the 1990s when camera records were made of his behavior. So he's basically in the pocket for the Israelis and the Zionists generally.
President of the universe. Professor Joseph Siracusa, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think this is a terribly interesting conversation. I've never had so many interesting people come in at it from different directions. I've been a diplomatic historian for 53 years and spent half my life in America, the other half in Australia. And I got to tell you that this is a funny kind of a war. I'm a big fan of non-intervention. I'm a critic of regime change. This idea that we can force a change in government quickly like this. I mean, has it occurred to anybody that the United States really isn't at war with Iran? We just simply attacked them. It was a punitive expedition to kill as many of the leaders as possible, try to get them to agree to certain things. It wasn't like a real war. It wasn't organized violence. It wasn't paid for by the American taxpayer. This is just another damn war paid for on the American credit card, which is why we have $36 trillion worth of debt since the Vietnam days. And so, it was a very bad policy. When I was in graduate school, we all had to read William Appleman Williams and the Tragedy of American Diplomacy. And he said way back then in the late 60s that the tragedy of American diplomacy is that it is self-defeating. Everything that Trump has set out to do has been the opposite of what he tried to do. And it reminds me a great deal of Mike Tyson's famous line that nobody's got a plan B until you get punched in the face. And so America got punched in the face in a war that's not really a war. I mean, if it's a war, then why are you worried about the ballroom at the White House or world wrestling, on the front lawn of the White House? I mean, it's ridiculous. What we did was we simply bullied these people, and Trump had great success in getting rid of Maduro. And this idea of creating these false indictments and then using your moral legal status to go in and start arresting people in the name of humanity is a joke. This is something the founding fathers would never have agreed to. In fact, most American diplomats and politicians between 1800 and 1949 thought this kind of behavior was sort of self-defeating. So I think Trump is, he's in a world that he doesn't understand. He's surrounded by people who are ingratiating themselves. And an awful lot of what I see from Trump, I mean, he starts to look like, and I'm going back to my Chicago background here, he starts to look like a protection racket. He only wants to help people who want to help him or enrich him and his friends. I mean, this is the strangest kind of diplomacy. As I say, Trump's my 16th president. This is the damnedest thing I've ever seen.
It is bizarre, and I'm just wondering what MAGA are thinking at the moment, whether they're walking into walls going, what the hell's happened? Can I ask you, John, what do you think the ultimate objective is with Iran at the moment?
Well, it's like it's what I said a moment ago. We just don't know, do we? Because you're asking about objectives. They change all the time. I think you just played Marco Rubio saying that Iran must not have a nuclear bomb. Well, come on. I mean, that's been going on for 20 years, for 25 years. It first started after the 2003 Iraq war when Netanyahu was already prime minister. We all remember his ridiculous cartoon bomb that he held up on the podium of the United Nations General Assembly. That was in 2004. And, but if Rubio is saying now Iran must not have a bomb, well, you probably recall that about 6 weeks ago, after the initial stages of the war had clearly failed to provoke regime change, Marco Rubio said, here are our objectives, write them down. People say we don't have objectives. Well, some of us did write them down, and they included destroying Iran's navy, destroying its air force, destroying its ballistic missile capacity, and so on. All those objectives have been abandoned, at least we haven't heard of them recently. Plus, of course, the objective of regime change, which was the initial goal. So I think the objective now, to be perfectly frank, is to get out of the mess that they have got themselves into, including, above all, the Strait of Hormuz, because again, I'm not saying anything anybody doesn't know, either on the panel or listening to us. The chokehold over the export of oil from the Gulf and other things is catastrophic. It's catastrophic. Energy commentators are saying now that even if it was open tomorrow, the consequences are going to be catastrophic. Reserves have been run down all over the world. The oil price is over $100 a barrel and may not return to anything like normal, precisely because of the huge shortages that have been created in these, whatever it is now, 2 months. So I think that their objectives now are simply to get out of the mess that they've got themselves into. But right now, to use Donald Trump's own expression, it seems to me that the Iranians hold all the cards.
Can I ask Dr. Kees Vanderpeel this question? What about the impact? What do you think the impact? Because already we see and Trump's talking about bombing Oman, but we see all the other Arab states there, Arab countries, and you can see that there's a gathering of the mind, and the mind aren't going to invite Donald Trump. If they, as Iran would like, if the Americans are not welcome in that particular part of the world, what does it do to Trump? What does it do to the world? And what does it do to just basically the lay of the land?
Well, as everybody's saying, American hegemony is going down, but I personally would rather phrase it as I just did. that the Euro-Atlantic bloc is disintegrating and being replaced by an Atlantic Zionist bloc. But that's a very unstable formation. It also goes hand in hand with changes in the particular social system that we have. You know, I grew up in mass production society, the welfare state, of course, also the Cold War, etc. Things were cheap and readily available. We've passed through a phase of financialization, and now we can see that this Atlantic Zionist phase is coincident with a control society, because after 2008 and the financial collapse then, we moved into a society that is more and more dependent on extreme control. So we're all controlled, and those who don't walk the line are actually excluded in brutal ways that are completely extra legal. Think of the journalists who from one day to the next lose their bank account, and you can't survive these days without making some payments from time to time. That sort of thing. So we have a system in which any individual dissenter is liable to being to maximum punishment. You know, in our part of the world, short of the death penalty. But basically, you're socially excluded to such an extent that you don't exist anymore, and that is something we haven't fully taken in, I guess. Just that we haven't fully taken in who rules the roost now, and that's not Netanyahu, because after Netanyahu is gone, it turns out that 93% or so of Israelis actually support his line. And this is the most brutal genocide that we've ever seen since World War II.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you there, and I think it's appalling. Joseph, what about the impact on Trump's polling? It's not all that squizzy, although he would tell you different. And what about the midterms? Will there be any Republicans left?
Well, Trump will hold his base. I mean, they are very loyal. I mean, there's no place else for them to go. Keep in mind that this is not Trump's following. They found him when he went to the White House in 2016. For the last 20, 25 years, Pew Research has shown that the majority of Americans believe that Washington cannot and will not do the right thing. Americans have given up on Washington. Or as one American vice president said, Washington is 70 square miles surrounded by reality. Most Americans can see that this war is folly and that Trump isn't going to do much good. Now, keep in mind, 155 million Americans voted the last time. 100 million Americans who are entitled to vote, they may be registered to vote. They don't bother to get out of bed. They don't vote on that day. So they're the ones who've given up. And it's the independents. Trump has gone from 61% to about 18% of independents support him. And without the independents, he can't win an election. My prediction is that the Republicans will get swamped. They'll be defeated very badly in midterm elections. That's why you're seeing a lot of people resigning their positions in the Congress or in the cabinet. They don't want to be there for questioning under subpoena, under oath by subpoena in 2027. I mean, they're trying to get out of town, as a matter of fact. So I think Trump will do very bad politically. He has already said that he doesn't care about the American consumer, that is, about their difficulty with gas and food and the rest of it, that kind of thing. And he's also said that he's not going to be bullied by the midterm thing. You know, he's thinking about his legacy now. So I think in the end, he's going to have a very, very poor legacy. He'll be known as James Polk was once in the Mexican War, as Polk the Mendacious. I mean, Trump hasn't really told the truth here. And look, Americans aren't as silly as they look. They can see that this isn't holding up very well. And his critics on the right, which is very odd, who might support him, think he hasn't done enough. They think he should go in, you know, like John Bolton with 2 guns going. And we can't go in. We all learned from the Vietnam War that regime change is not common. You can't bomb anybody into the Stone Age without troops. And even if you bring in troops, you got to bring in more than you imagined, as a matter of fact. And keep in mind about this ceasefire. You know, in 1952-53, we negotiated a ceasefire with the North Koreans. Well, we still have a ceasefire with the North Koreans. We're still in a state of war with them. So my prediction is that Trump is going to have to live with this concept that neither war nor peace. Iran's always going to be a thorn in his side. And, at the end of the day, Iran, well, they didn't win anything. They went 15 rounds with a superpower. And you know what? They're still standing. So, this says something. And the rest of the world may not actually be debating this in public, but they're watching very carefully what has happened here, and they will follow suit.
Well, you had it, Joseph. If Trump, and he will do it soon, he's done it already, he's declared victory, he probably needs to let the people of Iran know that too, and the government, because they don't understand that Trump's won it. What do you think when it is actually, they do broker a ceasefire of sorts, and how long that will last for, who knows? What do you think the official statement or stance from the White House will be, of course, written by Trump himself? How do they claim victory? Because normally in victory, the one that loses has less power, and I would possibly see that the one that loses has increased power.
Well, at the end of the day, Senator Hatfield used to say about Vietnam, if you want to get out of Vietnam with honor, just march out of the place, go to the ships and say, we won. That's all. Just tell the American people that this is a great victory. You might not see it yet, but down the road, your grandchildren will appreciate it and all the rest of it. Look, people know this is nonsense. And he is going to claim some kind of a victory here. But, the price of gasoline, when it hits $3, $4, $5 a gallon, hurts a lot of Americans. It hurts the farmers and the fertilizer and the rest of it. I mean, Americans ain't stupid. When it costs, when they can't afford to put food on their table or gasoline in their cars, they're going to get very angry with this guy. And Trump is going to have to worry about, his legacy. But I think he's given up on trying to explain himself. I mean, he's in the World Wrestling Hall of Fame. He's not an intellectual, and he's not surrounded by anybody who's smart. I mean, ever seen any president surrounded by dumber people? There's no one from Harvard there, or Brookings, or any of those people that used to write all this stuff. He's surrounded by people who yell at each other and who have a lot of opinions and no deep thoughts about anything. So I think a lot of people are going to sort of ditch him and worry about 2028. And this is going to be a very, very sad episode. But look, American policy for the last, since the war on terror, hasn't been very productive. It hasn't been very successful, and it has been very expensive. And that's what the American children and grandchildren have to worry about, is how to pay for all this folly.
John, what do you think?
I also agree with what Professor van der Pijl said. I think that yes, at the time of the end of communism, yes, I like the notion of an Anglo-Zionist structure. That's a good one. I hadn't heard that one before. But I think, together with Joe Saracusa, that it is coming to an end. I'm not saying it has come to an end, this Anglo-Zionist structure, this New World Order, but the cracks are surely showing. On Israel, I'm not sure what long-standing critics of Israel think about this, but I personally believe that there has been a sea change recently since the Gaza operation. I think that many people who were either indifferent or possibly even supportive of Israel and who were hostile to Islam and Muslim countries generally, I think many people, the scales have fallen from their eyes. And I think that Israel and therefore its American backer have lost moral standing on a scale that they probably don't understand. And I believe that's a very, very major sea change. And then in the world of reality, we mentioned the petrodollar a moment ago. So the petrodollar is also crumbling. And that, of course, is a basis of American power. It's one of the key bases of American power and has been since 1945. The fact that you needed dollars to buy oil. Well, you don't anymore, because there are colossal oil transactions now being conducted between Russia and China, between Russia and India, no doubt also between Iran and possibly even the Gulf states and third countries in currencies other than the dollar. And Trump himself once said that to lose the dollar, to lose the primacy of the dollar, would be like losing a war. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what it is. So I think it's like bankruptcy. It comes very, very slowly, and then when it happens very fast. So it hasn't happened yet. And I very much take what Kees van der Pijl says about the control society. Yes, of course, we live under a control society. We're a long way from escaping from that. On the contrary, I think the control society is getting worse. But everybody knows, and particularly the world outside the Atlantic Zionist sphere knows, so all the countries that we wrongly call the global south know this. They're looking at all this, as Joe Siracusa has just said. They know which side their bread is buttered. They know which side reality is. All these people looking in on us here in the collective West realise that the game is up. And Mike, when you asked how will Trump proclaim victory, well, he'll proclaim it with bluster. But nobody buys that anymore. Nobody buys it. We've had victory. He proclaimed victory on day one or day two. Nobody buys this stuff anymore. And, you know, he's a salesman. And when people don't buy your stuff anymore, then your business goes bust.
Dr. Kees van der Pijl, could you just tell me, will this, what's happening now, will it elevate Gaza's cause with the other Gulf states?
I'm afraid that the other Gulf states are not very interested in what happens to the people in Gaza. I'm more inclined to listen to Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia, who said when the Gaza operation was in full swing, look very carefully because this is what they will be doing to you the moment you rise up in great numbers. And it will be your own government doing it. And I think all these things tell us that the sort of democracy that we, I can say we grew up with, has long vanished, and that only the semblance of, we had here in the Netherlands, we had absolutely disgraceful scenes in our parliament, which remind you of the fact that the sort of people that we were used to thinking of governing us have long gone and have been replaced by almost criminal elements. Not just stupid in the traditional sense. Stupidity has been taken to much higher levels in the recent period. Just think of Kaja Kallas, the EU representative for foreign affairs and vice president of the Commission. It's the malice that is the most striking. The malice and the lack of respect for any rule. We call ourselves the rule-based order. Just let that sink in. The rule-based order is breaking all possible rules that you can imagine today, both in warfare and, as Joe said, there isn't even a war. It's a punitive operation. So we're looking at a collapse, but because we tend to think that in a world of states that it will have to be one state that collapses specifically before we can speak of a collapse, we must begin to realize that the world as such is collapsing because the ones that are still standing, which are Russia and China backing Iran in this particular conflict, the ones that are still standing also have signed up for the capitalist economy 10, 20 years ago. And they will therefore be drawn into the same vortex of speculation. And don't forget that what is happening, what Donald Trump, the businessman between quotation marks, is doing mainly is playing the stock market. On Friday he makes certain announcements. On Monday he takes them back again just to make sure that the friends, his friends who have advanced knowledge, will be able to cash in. Even his somewhat retarded son, I don't mean any negative comment, Jordan, I think he's called, is now booked at 120 million because so much is spilling over within the family on account of handling the Hormuz situation, that even the least capable member is profiting. So in that sense, we're looking at a general collapse, not as the collapse or decline of the United States to be replaced by something else. Because, as Brzezinski already said, the famous geopolitical commentator, when American hegemony goes down, it will not be replaced by another hegemony. Chinese or whatever, it will be replaced by chaos. And I'm afraid that that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, I agree too. I think there are many at play here, and I think the end result is sheer chaos. Um, Joseph, how do you think Europe will fare um, after this conflict in the Middle East? Do you think it'll be forced to face reality of economics and its dealing with Russia?
You're still talking to me.
No, I'm talking to Joseph. Sorry.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
I'm sorry. Would you run the question by me again? I thought you were talking to Keith.
No, I'm just wondering, how do you think Europe will fare from the war? And will it be forced to face reality of economics and maybe consider its dealings with Russia?
Oh, I think they're going to have to reconsider Russia coming back into the fold. Look, this war has shown Europe a number of things, and that is the United States can cause them a great deal of trouble over circumstances of which they have no control. I mean, this is a punitive expedition that started without any permission from Europe. The Europeans are paying the high price for petrol and fertilizer and the rest of it. I think, and the president, when he says that unless the Europeans come to the party, NATO's going to have to pay for it down the road. Well, I think the Europeans have got the impression now, clearly, that there's no place for them in Trump's relationship with them in Europe. I mean, they're going to have to do their own thing. And look, there's no reason why Europe can't do its own thing. I think it's been a little over reliant on the United States for far too long. I think Europe can do a better job, but it's going to have to do something with Russia. Russia is going to get back, become part of Europe again. They're going to have to come to some terms, and we're going to have to do a lot of this by going back to the old-fashioned politics of accepting yesterday's enemy as a member of the Commonwealth or the community of governments. I mean, we can't treat these people as criminals forever. I mean, that's not possible. But look, I think this war has finished off the American-European relationship. It's forced the Europeans to move into a different direction. And any European who claims now to count on the United States to come to them in a moment of peril, I think they'd have a tough time explaining that to anybody, certainly to the Trump administration. So I think NATO, like CENTO, like CETO, has probably outlived its usefulness. Something else will replace it. But look, I'm always hopeful. I believe in the glass half full. Maybe something good will come out of all this. Maybe there's some great minds who will come forward and suggest various things that we haven't suggested in the past. So I think maybe I'm looking for the silver lining. I hope there is one.
John, do you think there's a silver lining? How do you think?
No, I don't. I don't. I can't see it at all. On the contrary, I think Europe is now set on exactly the opposite trajectory from the one that Joe has just outlined. I believe that the hostility to Russia is so deeply ideological for Europe that there is no prospect of it of Europeans breaking out of it in the near future. Yes, it'll happen at some point, in some very distant point in the future. But right now, the trajectory is exactly the opposite. Yes, the Atlantic Alliance, for the time being, is on hold. Yes, the Europeans feel abandoned by Trump. That is correct. But their response to it is to try to rearm themselves. The famous 90 billion new loan that they have allegedly given to Ukraine, but which in reality is recycled, as Julian Assange explained to us 20 years ago, back into the arms industry. In this case, they hope largely into the European arms industry. And voices in Germany, particularly, I mentioned Germany particularly because I think Germany's role in this is key. Jeffrey Sachs has just written an open letter to the German Chancellor. Germany, on the contrary, it's literally incredible to observe, but seems to be gearing up for round three. What I mean by round three is after the first two rounds in 1914 and in 1939. I believe that there is a genuine conviction in German circles, no doubt not unanimous, but high up in German government circles, that their problem in the previous two conflicts was that they didn't have the backing of France and Britain and other European countries. And they ended up losing in those two wars because they had to fight on two fronts. And now they think they won't have to fight on two fronts because Britain, France and the rest of the world backs them up. And, we're hearing absolutely incredible stuff coming out of Germany. There's a CDU member of the Bundestag who wrote last week in the newspaper that there had to be unconditional capitulation, bedingungslose Kapitulation, which was what the Allies, of course, obtained from Nazi Germany in 1945. There had to be a Stunde Null, a 0 hour for Russia. This kind of extremist talk is now surfacing in Germany. Okay, maybe it won't come to that. Maybe the German tanks won't be rolling into Russia anytime soon. But the mindset in Germany, and Germany, after all, is probably the most important country in Europe after Russia. The mindset, I believe, is travelling in that direction, and so I'm afraid I don't see any prospect whatever of Russia being brought back into the European family by the Europeans in any close future date. I'm sorry to say that.
Dr. Kees van der Pijl, can you tell me what your thoughts are on the Gulf states' position with regards to the bases of the US? We see that Donald Trump he's said he's decided to threaten Oman, and he'll threaten everybody if he decides to, and then he'll forget that he's done it the next day, probably, and then do it to someone else. But he's threatening of Oman and other entities in the Middle East. Do you think the Americans have got much chance, as much as a snowflake in hell, of keeping their bases in the Middle East, or do you think there are other things at play here?
Well, the bases are already gone, and the Iranians are very glad that they were able to eliminate radar installations that were in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and UAE, because now it's raining again in Iran. Don't forget that the radars were used for over many years for the HARP system, which is a weather influencing system. And as a result, last year there was serious talk about evacuating the 9 to 10 million people who live in Tehran because there was absolutely no water left. And for the first time since these radars have been eliminated, there's snow again on the mountains, and you see images of Tehran. So everybody in the region will draw their conclusions, but don't forget that these Arab Gulf monarchies are not societies as we tend to think of them. They are royal families and dynasties who have been put there basically after the First World War by the Brits. Think of Lawrence of Arabia. And they have very little indigenous population. People forget that Yemen has twice the population of Saudi Arabia. So Yemen is a much more important place than these monarchies, because they have a lot of weapons, but basically they bought them merely as a goodwill sign to the United States and not as real military investment, because they lack the military personnel to operate them. All the work in these monarchies is being done by Pakistani and other guest workers. So they are very fragile formations. And although a friend of my son actually went on holiday to Dubai, and people use it as a stop in between on the way to Asia, very little will be left of it, I think, when all this blows over. And the United States will certainly go, just as Britain left east of Suez. The United States will leave east of Suez. And the problem is, as the other guests already remarked, both of them, the United States is facing the problem of getting out of it. I'm afraid that they first will bomb Iran back to the Stone Age. That's Trump's gift to Netanyahu, to put it simply. But after that, they'll leave. And, well, we must hope that there will be some recovery Iran is a very strong civilization. It's so remarkable if you think that only half of the Iranian population are real Persians, while the others are Azeris and other nationalities, and yet there's not a chance that that country breaks apart. Even when Iraq attacked it in
Yeah.
1980, you would have expected that the Arabs that live in Iran would be siding with Saddam Hussein, and they didn't. And today, the Azeris don't defect, the Kurds don't defect, although Trump thought that by arming them he would start a civil war. It didn't work. Somehow there's a very strong sense of community among these different components of the Iranian society. And that makes them completely invincible, I think, even if they must expect, I fear, terrible degradations of the type that Israel is now applying to southern Lebanon, actually middle Lebanon.
John, what do you think?
I think that's a wonderful analysis. I love the remarks you've made about the Middle East. The image came to mind. It's a bit of a corny one, but you know, American power is a castle built on sand. And the city of Dubai, which you've mentioned, of course, symbolizes, doesn't it, and embodies all the trends that you've outlined. What I mean by that is that it's a sort of fantasy land. It's a sort of Disney world. It's built out of this financialized globalist world that's grown up in the last 30 years. But yes, the bases have been destroyed. That is a very major development, and it's one of the many aspects of reality with which the Americans are confronted. And it may not be admitted in the American public discourse, but the destruction of those bases in Bahrain and Qatar and all the rest of it is surely the reason why, after only a few weeks into the conflict, America started to beg for a ceasefire, precisely because it saw that its bases in that region had been destroyed or neutralized. So this is an example of, as what I said earlier, about the bluster, Trump's bluster, coming up against the brick wall of reality. And that's where they are now.
Joseph, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to use my crystal ball here, if I may. I think the political and military architecture of the Gulf states will be changed forever. I think they put all their money, all their chips on the United States, and in the crunch, when the United States had to do something for them, it did something for Israel first. It got involved with a very strong neighbor of theirs who has been punishing them ever since. So I doubt they're going down that way. And also I see, when this is over, when the Americans have gone, I see the Pakistanis, the Turks, and maybe the Iranians forming a different kind of a pro-Palestinian crowd. You know, they'll have their own links and they'll be pushing their own weight in the area. So I think we're going to have some major changes in this neck of the woods. Also, I think the South Koreans and the Japanese have been looking at this. I think this is just enough to push them over the edge to get their own nuclear weapons, because the United States cannot be trusted. And let me say this too, and I've had this impression from following the Gulf War, the Ukraine war, like everybody else. I think that tactical nuclear wars can be fought and they can be won. I think we've been modernizing since the 1950s. You can use these things to get rid of airports and parts of cities and without radiating the whole area. I think a lot of people will be looking for what the Americans had during the Cold War and what America's enemies are looking for now. That is the great equalizer. I think a lot of things are going to go haywire in the world of nuclear arms control. We're going to have people going in different directions. So I think this war is going to have repercussions and consequences far beyond what we see on our television screens.
Can I ask you also, Joseph, do you think the Board of Peace, I won't laugh here, but do you think that also has a snowflake's chance in hell of succeeding?
Well, when I heard about the Board of Peace, and once again, we go back to this analogy of Trump administration is just a racket. protection racket. I kept thinking of P.T. Barnum's famous line about there's a sucker born every minute. Nobody could possibly believe that the Board of Peace has any interest in peace or bringing the Palestinian people rest and prosperity. I mean, that ain't going to happen. That was sort of an afterthought. I'm sure that was worked out on a napkin somewhere in Mar-a-Lago, and it has no substantial basis for working.
Okay, so what do you think? Do you think the Board of Peace has got a chance, or do you think it's through to the keeper, as we would say in Australia?
Although even the greatest joke has a serious side, and this is a big joke, of course. The fact that Tony Blair is there, which is one of the most morally corrupt people I can imagine of the recent period. And still there was something that struck me, and that was that the president of Kazakhstan was a member of the Board of Peace. Now, I must honestly say that I don't know much more than that, but I'm a bit concerned about how Russia these days is losing more and more of its former Soviet fellow provinces, maybe the best word, now turned into independent states. I mean, if Kazakhstan is willing to participate in the Board of Peace, which is a joke and nothing to do with peace, I don't have to explain that in this company. And you look at what's happening in Armenia now. Don't forget that Marco Rubio was on the plane and landing in Yerevan to express his support for the current pro-Western, anti-Russian president of Armenia. I mean, Armenia is a country where Russia has a military base. It has 5,000 man troops. There are many reasons why Russia cannot let go of Armenia, because Armenia is also part of several post-Soviet organizations in the region. So, in that sense, one of the successes of the NATO operation in Ukraine, beginning with the coup in 2014 and so on, I fear is the gradual loosening of the post-Soviet space and the potential isolation of Russia. Because the war, of course, is not going well at all in Ukraine, even if people look at it and keep repeating that Russia's winning and so on and so forth. Ukraine is a corrupt racket. But the loss of Armenia might be a trigger for new destabilizing events in the region. And I must say that I'm very concerned about what will be happening there. And otherwise, I cannot just add that what Joe said about the technology changes that are taking place in warfare are extremely important. I don't believe in tactical nuclear weapons for a host of reasons, but the use of hypersonic missiles and the mass use of drones, swarms of drones of hundreds of, even 500 to 1,000, that is something that will change waging war forever, and maybe will prompt people to begin to reflect on whether the whole idea of war and punitive expeditions is not something that we should leave behind.
John, the Trump or the US and Gulf states, the future relationships, who needs who more?
Well, I suspect that there are already subterranean or submarine currents underway. I've heard, I haven't confirmed it, that Saudi Arabia and Iran have come to an agreement that if, and after all, don't forget that a couple of years ago they established diplomatic relations with each other after a long period under Chinese sponsorship. They've come to an agreement that if there's any future attack, then Iran will instead concentrate its fire on Israel and not on the Gulf. So I suspect that there are contacts, on both sides of the Persian Gulf, and no doubt a rearrangement of alliances. Saudi Arabia is the guest of honor next week at the International Economic Forum in St. Petersburg. And Saudi Arabia has for some time been flirting with rapprochement with Russia. It was supposed to join BRICS and then it stepped back. But maybe these latest events will cause it to reassess its foreign policy. I hear what Kees van der Pijl says about Armenia and Kazakhstan, and I think that he's absolutely right to flag up those as matters for concern for Russia. I don't think that when I've talked earlier about the American empire, or whatever we want to call it, collapsing, I did say that it's not happening yet, but that it will happen in the long run. But until we're in the long run, until the collapse comes, if it does come, yes, there will continue to be, they never give up. I mean, there will continue to be attempts to encircle, to prize allies off from each other and so on. But I think the key thing in all this is surely the relationship between Russia and China. And that, as far as I can tell, remains immensely solid. Solid because it's a mutually beneficial alliance. Beneficial to Russia and to China for different reasons. It's not, as some of the American commentators say, Russia somehow being absorbed by China. No. And I think that is a source of considerable strength to Russia. Although, yes, I agree that if these other former Soviet republics are prized off, that's bad for her as well.
Joseph Siracusa, how is the relationship between Russia, China, and even the US? Has it how has the conflict in the Middle East altered the playing field a bit?
Well, I think the Chinese are sitting back, trying to look like good citizens. They've been very constructive about Ukraine and about the Middle East. They've offered their services. I think we should take them up from time to time. I don't think the Russians and the Chinese are going to get in bed together for very long. I don't think they trust each other. There's still a 6,000-mile border between the two of them. And at the end of the day, even in the 1960s, they didn't really trust each other. So I think they'll use each other as much as they can. I think Americans now are going to, of course, particularly those in Washington, who've been identifying China as the next enemy of the United States, followed by Russia as the second greatest threat. They may have to rethink this thing through. China's not interested in getting in a war with the United States. There's never going to be a war over Taiwan. The United States is never going to risk New York City for Taipei, and Beijing is never going to, Xi's never going to risk Beijing for Taipei. That's never going to happen. Might be a problem with the South China Sea and that kind of thing with freedom of navigation. So I think the Russians and the Chinese will try to use each other as much as they can while the Americans are struggling. And look, I can't wait for the American empire to end. I mean, this American empire took my generation, the Vietnam generation, and they drove them into a war we did not want. We could never win, and we were just treated like fodder, cannon fodder. So, I mean, I can't wait for this so-called thing. And for Americans to concentrate on America. I like the idea of a multipolar world. I like the idea of the balance. This idea of the superpowers. I even got to meet Bill Fox, the guy who coined the phrase, guy from Colombia. And in the beginning, he said he thought the superpowers would be Britain, the United States, and Russia. So at the end of the day, it was just the United States and Russia. And I'll tell you what, this idea that the United States has been a superpower or a unipower after 1991, it's a bit of a construct, academic construct. I mean, the United States hasn't got anybody to do what they wanted them to do. We got stuck in Vietnam. We got stuck in Afghanistan and Iraq and all the rest of it. The United States has not been able to get people to do what they want them to do because people, if they're prepared to fight, they can handle a superpower because look at all the great empires that disappeared in the Khyber Pass. If people want to fight, they will fight. And the American empire has been very, very slow on the uptake about sending foreign legions into strange places because Americans can't handle the large loss of life, Donald Trump is not the kind of president who's going to greet all those body bags at an Air Force base. He's not that kind of a guy. He doesn't want to do that kind of thing. And so I think, if this is a retraction of American power, well, then so be it. But my concern is, as John and Keisha pointed out, that maybe the United States will try to overreact in the next couple of years to keep the empire going, or what they think is the empire. But this idea, when Trump says Americans, they'll do whatever they have to do to keep Iran from delivering a nuclear weapon. I thought we heard that last year when he bombed the hell out of Iran with those B-2 bombers. I mean, I heard the same story then. Iran's not going to do it, and the president's talking about forever. Make sure that Iran will never or forever has a nuclear weapon. What world does he live in? Even if you took away their bombs and their fuel, they still have the knowledge to do it. And if you didn't have the knowledge to do it, you can buy it from some Pakistani AQ Khan outfit that still has nuclear weapons on the shelf. I mean, you can do this anytime you wanted to do. So this idea that we're doing all this for humanity is sort of a farce. I mean, Trump did it for himself. And I'm afraid by the time this show is over in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about what happened in Cuba, because this president is determined to commit American forces to the liberation of Cuba. And let me tell you from my own study of the Spanish-American War, when the rebels start to fight American forces, they're pretty good at it, as a matter of fact.
Can you, because you got the American twang, so I'm going to pick on you here. When was the last war that the Americans won? They start a lot, but I just want to know, because I'm researching my internet here, and I can't find one. So can you just
Grenada.
Well, yeah, we beat Grenada,
Grenada, sorry, Grenada, yeah. That was a massive.
Yeah, Grenada.
Yeah,
we lost a lot of troops there anyway. Look, Americans have very little to show since 1945. They haven't got a lot of big runs on the board. And every American president who tried to get into a war, whether it was Korea, whether it was Nixon or Lyndon Johnson, and then George W. Bush, they became very unpopular because of these wars. Americans don't want to go to war with everybody, as a matter of fact. I mean, it doesn't solve our problems. We're worried about other things. America has social ills. As Bernie Sanders, God love him, he likes to say that 70% of Americans live from paycheck to paycheck. Half of them don't have medical services. We have terrible conditions in America. And I'd like to see the military-industrial complex just sort of deflect for a little while and solve some of America's problems. But look, if this is the cost of our empire, then it can't happen soon enough for me.
So we've ascertained, we all know that America loves to start the war. I mean, start it, they fight it. How do we finish it? I mean, anyway, that's the next thing that West Point will be teaching their generals to do, how to finish a war. And they keep using, as I hear the horn in the car, hopefully it's not honky. Hopefully it's not your Uber, John. Honky.
No, it's not. It's just some traffic.
Yeah, tell them to shut up. But I'm just thinking, though, the Americans need to actually work out how to finish a war. As final question to the three of you, because at the moment we have the Middle East. Joseph mentioned Cuba, and Cuba's going to be very interesting. I think that could develop into something very, very ugly. Yet another one, though, that the Americans will lose. I don't mean to be rude, but they will lose it. What do you think, Case, about Cuba? Do you think there's going to be a stoush? And when do you think, as part two to that one, when do you think the Americans will stop wanting to attack everybody?
Well, not during Trump's time, because he is surrounded by people. Rubio actually wants to become president of Cuba, unless that's a joke. And there's, of course, a very powerful exile community in Miami, just in the area where Trump resides. Now, I feel very sad about the prospect, because Cuba has a very old army. I mean, its military equipment is very much outdated and will stand no chance. In one sign, and there I stop. One sign of the malice of the current American people in power was that when an American delegation arrived in Havana, I think a week ago, to discuss matters of common interest, as they say. They brought with them a paramilitary guy who was also involved in using a new type of weapon to destroy the Cuban guards of Maduro before they abducted him. And now he's in a cell of 2 by 3 meters. So they brought that guy to show this is a sort of equipment that we can use to simply blow you up to pieces, because as you will recall, the Cuban guards were brought home. I mean, their remains in small boxes because their bodies no longer existed as a result of this operation. Now, that's a sort of malicious imperialist criminality that we see here, and you can only imagine what will happen to Cuba when they go in, and they are ready to do that. It can happen any day now.
John, final thoughts on that? It's always an uplift.
Yeah, I share that analysis. I visited Tehran about just under 20 years ago, and I remember a very intelligent Iranian commentator saying to me that the Americans always create a new drama, a new scandal, a new crisis to hide the previous ones that they haven't been able to resolve. And this scenario of yet another war, just as the Iran war may have been launched also to cover up the Epstein files. So yes, I can see some sort of operation like that in the Western Hemisphere, designed to cover up the Iran catastrophe. And I think it is a catastrophe for them because, as I think I've said earlier, I don't see how they can get out of it. They can have all the strategies they want, but they have walked into a trap from which there isn't really any escape, because so long as Iran controls that waterway, I really don't see what the Americans can do about it. Yes, they can inflict a lot of damage from the air, but we all know that's in fact, if you like, the main lesson of this war, and that goes back to what Joe was saying a moment earlier about the futility and the inability of America to win battles. You can't win wars, serious wars, by air power alone. Afghanistan showed that. Ultimately, the Yugoslav operation in 1999 showed it as well, Libya too. And this particular case, the Strait of Hormuz, is, in my view, completely intractable. And it's impossible to see how they can get out of it without a massive loss of face. So maybe Trump can pull that off with the bluster I've referred to, but it seems to me to be very difficult. And so in that scenario, yes, a further crisis to hide the previous ones, I'm afraid, is no doubt on the cards.
Yep, and I was just thinking, I went to Key West a while back, and that big Conch Republic thing. I wonder if they'll use that as a military base there, using that as a point of no return. Joseph, just finally, your thoughts on what we've been talking about. If there is a war with Cuba, where do you see how do you see this developing? I see other nations being brought into this quite quickly. How do you see this?
Well, I think a lot of the Latin American nations would like to get involved in bringing this war to a close before it even starts. As a matter of fact, they don't want this to spill over. And that Cuban community in Florida and other places is a very powerful determinant about this regime going forward. You're right about Rubio pushing this because it's in his DNA to get rid of this regime. Americans have been obsessed with Cuba since 1962. They've been obsessed with Iran since 1979. America has a number of these obsessions that they try to exercise with war, but it doesn't work at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, you have to come to terms with your neighbors. This idea of punishing Cubans because of some quarrel they had in 1962 sounds ridiculous to me. And the same thing with the Persians and the Iranians and the rest of it. I mean, it seems like America should have learned something from this, but we seem to have learned nothing. And I think the problem is, and I just want to say this, is that I think the problem is that the IQ in the Oval Office has declined sharply since Richard Nixon. Nixon got caught with Watergate. That is, he didn't do Watergate, but he tried to cover it up. And then Jimmy Carter came out of nowhere and did nothing in particular except make a mess. And then we had Bill Clinton who got caught with his pants down. And so I think a lot of Wall Street just regards, and a lot of Americans regard what goes on in the Oval Office as a soap opera. They don't take it seriously. We don't have a lot of serious people in the Oval Office, and now we've got. I'm going to use John's quote. Great quote. I saw one of your videos the other day about the lunatics have taken over the asylum. That's how I feel about the White House right now. The lunatics are in charge.
Yep, it's. I think Australia is safe from being attacked by Trump because they have no idea what we're saying. We sound funny. We don't move our lips. But once they work out that we speak English, we're in trouble. Look,
Yes.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Dr. Kays Vanderpyle. If somebody wants to find out more about you, how do they do that?
Well, to wait a few more weeks and then my book, Israel and 9/11, will come out.
I can't wait for that one. Put me on the list for that, please. John, if somebody wants to find out more about
Yeah,
you.
thank you. My main platform is Forum for Democracy International, fvdinternational.com, and on X, fvd_intl.
And Emeritus Professor Joseph Syracuse, how do they find out more about you?
Just type my name into the World Wide Web and next to Amazon. I've had a very nice career. I've had 54 books and 45 PhD students. So it's all out there for everybody to see.
Fantastic. I have got nothing like that. So anyway, I'll go home and just sulk. Thank you very much for being part of the Protagonists. And thank you to our audience too. We're absolutely fascinating. I said this to John last time. I feel like I'm in class, and what I'm learning is just absolutely amazing. To share this space with the guests that we have is just second to none. Catch you tomorrow for another episode of the Protagonists. This is The World Today.